Tēnā koutou katoa. Good morning all. I'm a partner at Mosaic and it's my pleasure to facilitate this panel on fraud, scams and cyber risks. And I'm joined on stage with three very experienced practitioners who I think are going to bring their expertise and what I'm sure will be some thoughtful perspectives on this topic. I'll ask them to briefly introduce themselves in a moment, but I guess before I do so, I just wanted to share, I think, what I expect would be a reasonably common observation from all of us here today, and that is that the sophistication we're facing into as an industry in this space is unprecedented. And I think it's only going to become more so. If I reflect back, the idea of fraud in a KiwiSaver hardship application a few years ago, you'd think, what are you talking about? How could that possibly happen? And even more recently, in scrolling through Instagram feeds amongst the infinite number of entertaining cat videos, I find deepfake AI of two of our very recognised industry icons appearing. So that's what we're leaning into as an industry. And I guess at the core of our industry is trust. Trust that consumers have in our system, that it works, is fundamental, and collectively we have to make sure that trust is maintained notwithstanding these challenges. So I have a number of questions that we'll work through, and as always, you're very welcome to provide additional comments and questions for the panel. And if we run out of time for those, I'm sure everyone's available to have a chat afterwards. So with that context, I'll ask each of the panelists to maybe just briefly introduce themselves, and then we'll get the conversation underway.
Me first, right? Okay, sorry. I feel like Mr. No Friends on the sofa on my own here, but so please be kind. I'm Roger. I'm the Chief Executive of the New Zealand Banking Association, and we act as a voice for the industry. We've got 17 member banks or registered banks, and so we act on issues where there's points of commonality, where we advocate for the industry to government, to media, to regulators.
Anthony.
Nice. For those in the room who know me, I'm Anthony Steele. Steelo is my street name. I'm a partner at PwC and the firm's CRO. So I sort of wear two hats, really. I am a client-facing partner, so I until very recently, led our cyber and digital trust practice, which is all about how do you manage cyber risks safely. But also, as the firm's CRO, I also look after our own internal cyber security, but I'm also responsible for our general counsel function, our enterprise risk function, our risk settings as a whole around compliance for the firm.
Tēnā koutou katoa. I'm Kristy Redfern. I'm the CRO in EM Legal for Asteron. So my perspective, not dissimilar to Steelo, is it? Was from that risk perspective, cyber risk being on everyone's top of mind for CROs, and really for me, being in the insurance sector for the last 20 years, how that's sort of playing out and making sure that we really are doing our role to support our customers, and that's the number one.
Great. So let's kick it off and I guess reflect on the scene and the threat landscape. And so it'd be great to hear each of your perspectives on how you see the nature and sophistication of fraud, scams and cyber attacks evolving across your respective domains, and what's keeping you up at night. Roger, should we kick off with you?
So if I can just make some general remarks about fraud and scams, and I want to say just two or 3 points. First is that actually, when did you last hear about a bank robbery? They just really don't happen anymore. And that's because scams are taking their place, essentially, as a way of stealing money from people. So we talk about scams as digital ram raids because that's essentially what they are. They happen from the darkened room somewhere overseas or sometimes domestically that nobody sees, or there's no physicality to that crime. But there's also what we call an ecosystem of scams, where when you think about how a scam starts and then plays out, it will typically start with a scammer paying money to a social media company or a digital platform to promote their scam. The customer then gets caught up in that, or it might be a telco sending a text message. The customer then gets caught up in that and buys into the whole ecosystem. And then the end point is when the customer decides to pay the money away from their bank account to the scammer. So there's a whole process that goes on. And I was talking to Tom from Sorted during the coffee break, and we were talking about it's actually like it's almost like we're on a war footing with scammers. You know, it's a war against shutting them down and trying to reduce the harm that they're causing New Zealanders, because it's a real scourge on our society. And we call it a bit like whack-a-mole too, because you think you've shut something down, and because there's money to be made out of scams, it'll pop up with some other iteration of it. And so it's virtually impossible to always keep on top of it. So that's what keeps me awake at night. And then you interplay things like AI into the scamming environment, and suddenly it just can escalate and be even more sophisticated than it already is. And I'll just give you a really quick, simple example of how AI can play a role in scams. You know, one of the real red flags early on with scams as identifying a scam was bad grammar or spelling in the message, right? AI can fix that. So once again, that red flag completely is dealt with thanks to AI. But similarly, AI can also be a great preventative measure, because those digital media companies or social media companies or digital platforms that I talked about earlier at the start of the ecosystem, they can actually use the sophistication of AI to stop those messages from being promoted in the first place.
Thanks, Roger. Kristy.
Yeah, look, similar themes. We know increased sophistication through AI. So these are not, opportunistic hackers in their living rooms. These are well-funded, global, capable of exploiting even minor vulnerabilities. One example that landed last year, which was quite high profile but brought it home for me, was a poor finance employee had got a phone call around making an unusual payment. He sort of queried this. No, absolutely. Sent through the Microsoft Teams link, as we all do. Jump on that Teams link. Very much there. There is the global CFO saying, make this payment. It looked like him. It sounded like him. There were other execs on the call who also looked very similar. He made that payment, $25 million out of Hong Kong from an insurer. You can't take that back. So, these are vulnerabilities as human error, but then also how can we do and what we can do as an industry to help solve for that. Because for me, I think it's really personal. Every dollar that we are all spending in our organisations on fighting cyber attacks is a dollar we can actually take off premiums, we can use for our insurance, access, affordability. We've heard so much in the last couple of days around cost of living. And I know for one that I would far prefer to be paying that dollar to someone who really needs it rather than some of these faceless, what there is criminals. The second piece I'd say in terms of what's keeping me awake at night is just the speed and the scale of these cyber attacks. It really is mind-blowing. So from the time, we're talking on this panel to a lunchtime break, your systems can be frozen, completely locked out. So it's really around trust that, those breaches don't just come at a monetary price. It's around how we erode customer trust that's taken us many, many years to earn. So that's a moral obligation on all of us to trust that customer data. And in keeping with the 80s music theme, forgive me here, but I get knocked down, but I get up again. You're never going to keep me down. It is all about resilience and how we respond. It's not if these will happen, it's sort of when, and it's really around how we actually respond with trust, communicate clearly to our customers what's happened, apologise what we're doing about it, and being really upfront, because you can see a really broad spectrum around that, how that's happened.
Yeah, I think trust is going to be a theme through this, and we'll come back to it as well. Anthony.
I might sort of build on that a bit, right? The bit that kind of really keeps me awake at night is who's actually falling victim to some of these scams. And you'd be surprised, and there's probably people in the room that may have fallen victim, but some really sophisticated people who know technology really well still managing to fall for scams. And that keeps me awake, because if those people can get sucked in, then those that are vulnerable are even more at risk. And I think why is it that people are falling in? It's because of that level of sophistication that we're all talking about. It's the ease of being a successful cyber scammer. It's very straightforward to buy a service that starts you up in that industry, and it is an industry, right? It's a huge industry, scamming. It's billions and billions of dollars. It's very, very profitable. Because it's profitable, it gets investment. It's terrible to say that, but it gets investment in terms of the scamming. I think it comes at a time for us where organisations are investing in replacing legacy technologies. Those legacy technologies are often vulnerable. We're trying to move quickly as organisations in terms of how we do that, and we're trying to digitise. And what's the effect that has on people? Well, you can introduce vulnerabilities, and we do see examples where attackers have managed to get into organisations. They've managed to get hold of the data. They know they know things like what people's passwords are because they can find them on the dark webs. They can use the information they've harvested from those companies to do far more sophisticated and targeted attacks on individuals. Back to my original point around susceptibility of us all to fall for that. And so I think the thing that keeps me awake up at night is the combination of all of those factors, therefore lifting the risk profile in this space.
Yep. Great. And the theme of this conference is shared learning and collaboration as we look forward. And I was at an Australian Super Conference a few weeks ago, not long after the confluence of the cyber attack on that sector happened to conflate with a very volatile market and major market volatility and drawdown. And it created a real issue. And there's an observation at that conference that from the funds sector perspective, they weren't ready for that. They weren't able to collaborate. They didn't sort of have the thinking and the mindset wasn't necessarily there compared to some others. So thinking about collaboration, as an industry, how effective do you think we are today in terms of mitigating and sharing intelligence? Because the bad actors are absolutely sharing intelligence, right? So what is there more we could be doing? What are your perspective, Anthony? We'll come back to you on this one to start.
Yeah, sure. Look, I think there is a huge amount of collaboration that does occur. It can always be improved, right? Because I think there's often a hesitancy to collaborate from between competitors. So it could be banks or insurance companies. You've got to be really conscious around obligations to not cross any lines. But sometimes that can come at the cost of people really looking into what they can actually share safely, right? So there is appropriate sharing that can occur. Like I think there is excellent forums such as this where there's great collaboration, industry forums, use of regulators to help lift maturity and share challenges. We've got good government capability to help when incidents occurs and sharing of threat intelligence around all of that. So I think that's there. But I think really the main improvement point I see is just that willingness to go, can I collaborate in this space? And really challenging that, whether the answer is yes, rather than just going to the simple answer, which is, we're competitors, we can't collaborate. And just getting across that barrier in an appropriate way, of course.
Yeah. Roger, do you want to pick up on that in terms of the collaboration? Are there the barriers to that? Or?
Yeah, certainly, Phil. So what I would say is that no single organisation or for that matter, no single industry can tackle this issue on their own. It has to be multi-industry, multi-brands within a particular industry, and also it has to be a coordinated approach with government and the appropriate government agencies. So in banking, we have worked incredibly closely together as an industry, probably for the last two years at least, to work really collaboratively within the realms of competition law requirements, which is always a consideration for industry bodies, but to actually get in front of this issue as much as we can and to take a prevention first approach, which is the decided strategy that we've taken as banks to get in front of that. But it also, at the same time as we were doing that work as a banking industry, we also were making very clear signals to government that, hang on, back to the ecosystem I was talking about earlier, we can't do this on our own. We need a whole lot of players in that ecosystem to also step up and participate in prevention of scams. And so the government, to their credit, have actually formed what they're calling an anti-scams alliance, which is a whole lot of different industries working with government and with government agencies to have a coordinated strategy and approach to try and get in front of scams. And in fact, Kirk and I have been talking about the appropriateness and timeliness for the FSC to become involved in that body. And so I think there will come a time when that's appropriate for the people in this room to participate in that wider ecosystem.
And Kristy, your view?
Yeah, look, I think none of us are going to solve this in our own organisations. It's around elevating that cyber risk as a national priority. You know, global businesses that want to do business in New Zealand, that's the brand of NZ Inc. that we all aspire to. So there's that famous quote around everyone has a plan until you're punched in the face. So I would encourage all of you to get those BCP plans out, your cyber policy plans, and we can have the most amazing 80-page policy on cyber, which a number of the law firms would just glow with pride on, but they are of no use if you haven't got the culture to back that up. So is it on your leaders' forums all the time? When was the last time you actually ran a drill? Do you know, actually, quick, just have a think, looking around your tables, do you know if your organisation would pay a ransom? Have you had that conversation with your boards? Really right through from your frontline customer-facing people. This is not just an IT team's issue. It really is around speaking up. And we can't do that alone. So to Roger and Anthony's points, it needs to be, a national priority. What more are we really doing there, and how are we sort of communicating that? And my perspective on this was for FSC and others around an opportunity, cross-industry drills, joint playbooks. We don't have to look too far across the Tasman. So some of the big cyber attacks there, they're on an airline, they're on a telco. If that happens in New Zealand, we're all impacted on that. It definitely won't be just a number of us. So yeah, those joint playbooks and cross-industry drills, I think, have really got a place.
Just building on that a little, and particularly the themes around resilience and operational resilience. People look outside New Zealand, look across at other jurisdictions. In the EU, you see Digital Operational Resilience Act, DORA. We've seen in APRA, CPS 230, 234, building and basically forcing the agenda in many ways on the licensing entities to up the game. Are there lessons for us over there when you're looking outside of our own borders and looking back in terms of where we are? Are there things we should take from that and do, or things we shouldn't do? There's some learnings the other way. Kristy, do you want to continue the perspective on that?
Yeah, thanks, Phil. And look, full disclaimer here, I've just had the last 3 years working in the Australian market, leading some legal teams there, and have returned to New Zealand this year. So I think some of my experience over there was interesting, the focus on the regulators on operational resilience, and we're seeing that coming through here, incredibly important. So knowing who you partner with, but like marriage, as in business, is so important. So you could be doing all the best things, but if you're partnering with third parties that don't hold this value and have their systems up to a standard, you really are opening yourselves up as well. So it's a shift from a compliance mindset to that resilience, and I'll use two examples. I'll call them Company A was one I was involved in Australia, and look, after they were hacked, it was a law firm, probably spent 6 months writing letters back and forward to us around whether they could or couldn't confirm whether our data had been breached, denying all liability, doing all the good things, whilst our own IT teams were able to look very quickly on the dark web and say, well, look, here it is, and this is the piece. So Company B was the absolute opposite, in which we had an experience where the CEO fronts up in person, apologises, doesn't actually know if your data's been breached, but says, assume it has been, please change all passwords. This is happening in real time within a day. So I think for us, the international lessons on those are, do the closed door sessions, talk to the CEOs where they have had impacts on that, and take that stigma away and kind of learn from it, because those were two really different experiences, and you really need to think about the customer at the other end.
Mm-hmm. Roger, from the banking viewpoint, looking offshore, thinking where we're at, what are your comments on lessons and where to
Yeah,
go?
well, as I said earlier, we've taken a prevention first in our strategy to try and combat scams, and that's around actually, as an industry, we've committed to 5 specific things that we will have in place by the end of November to give assurance to customers that we're doing all we can to protect them. But a number of those things, or some of those things, haven't been invented here. We haven't started from the ground up here. We've actually looked globally at what is best practice and what are some of the really good initiatives that are happening internationally that we can implement. And one example I can give you is the first of those 5 commitments which we rolled out is something called confirmation of payee, which you've possibly experienced now if you've gone to pay someone new or for the first time, or a one-off payment where you're asked to match the bank account number with the name of the person you're paying, and you'll either get a complete match or a partial match or no match at all. And so that product we actually bought as an industry off the shelf and implemented across 13 retail banks in a record time. What that meant was that we were able to get confirmation of payee up and running in New Zealand quicker than any other jurisdiction in the world. And not that we're competitive, but we beat Australia with that, which was always very satisfying, isn't it, on a range of levels? But actually, we could take the best of international practice and learn what we could do and apply that with the technology and with the customer safety that we had in mind.
Angie, anything from your perspective, thinking international?
I was sort of reflecting as people are talking on my career, right? It sort of started with, you could walk out and do an IT audit or something like that, and cyber wasn't a thing. We don't get attacked here. We don't need to focus on it, and there was very, very little investment. And that then shifted to, in the last sort of 7 years, it was sort of, we've got to keep the bad guys out. It's all about threat intelligence, prevent, detect, shut down, right? And then more recently, last 3-4 years, it's been, okay, we're gonna accept that people may get in, and therefore we need to focus much more on resilience and recovery, and sort of the realization that I think society's accepting that attacks happen and breaches do occur. Society is much less accepting of it took ages to recover the systems. They're also much less, and this is, I think, the lesson, but much less comfortable when there's significant information breach, right? And I think this is the area where New Zealand does need to kind of invest a bit more, and that's how do we actually protect our stakeholders' data, so Privacy Act compliance and things like that, where I think we're a little behind as a country around, do we know where our data is, what it is, what's the valuable data that we have, and how are we making sure we're only keeping what we really need, and that we're protecting it appropriately, right? And I think that's kind of something to be reflected on around how do we make sure we're doing that properly.
I mean, there's a whole other conversation around data governance and privacy with the overlay of AI, which we could spend hours on, I'm sure, as well.
Yeah.
But I guess thinking about, building on that theme of the emerging and challenging technologies, we have open banking now moving at a faster pace. On the face of it, that offers the opportunity to create some new and exciting propositions for clients and consumers in the market, and with new organisations in the fintech sector and others being able to bring those propositions to market. So on the one hand, you go awesome. On the other, you think, wow, there's all that data that's now out there, and notwithstanding consumer data right and the protections, we want to put around that, and we're also, on the other hand, potentially exposing ourselves even more to the global spammers out there, and scammers rather, who can operate using AI and other technology at scale and at speed. So how do we embrace the opportunity on one hand, and yet manage those risks that are clear on the other? So Roger, do you want to start that one off?
Yeah, open banking is obviously a really exciting initiative, which our industry is completely supportive of. But you're absolutely right, Phil. It all comes down to customer data and ensuring that customer data is fully protected and safe. Because when you think about you think about your transactional history, even for the last month in your bank account, right? That if that was leaked, that says a lot about you, okay? People can find out a lot about you from your transactional activity, right? So the security of that data is paramount. And so we're going through a process now where we're getting accreditation frameworks in place through the government, who are implementing this accreditation framework for open banking, which really I think open data is a better phrase to explain what we're talking about there. But that safety of consumer data is imperative. And I think one of the really interesting challenges in relation to scams and open banking and open data is actually a bit of a contradiction of a message that consumers have been getting, because for years we've been saying, do not share your data, do not share your credentials, keep that secure. And when you think about it, open data contradicts that position, right? Because we're saying the very premise of open data is opening all of that up to a third party. Now, we all know that that'll be done in a safe and secure environment, but from a consumer standpoint, I've been concerned for some time that consumers will be confused by that contradiction of message.
Anthony, your perspective?
Look, I think the experience I have with organisations that are sort of startups and trying to really disrupt within financial services in particular is that compliance with data requirements and working with the big banks' requirements around how they do that are a barrier to them feeling like they can move forward. But they are table stakes, so you have to do it, right? So for me, it's sort of, how do those organisations meet that standard as efficiently and effectively as possible, but to a really good quality level? Because I think there is a bit of a lack of quality that can occur here. It's perceived as sometimes a tick the box exercise when you start a relationship with a big bank, right? And I think open data, open banking, because it's multi-sector, right? That's sort of something I think that those organisations figure out how to overcome really quickly. Because it's really important that data is protected, but it's also important that we move forward and innovate as quickly as we can.
Yeah. And Kristy, your view, I think I'm interested in the insurance sector is in terms of how it's embracing the richness of data that can be
look,
exposed.
I think we just need to be really careful that over-regulation doesn't stifle the innovation. Look, I'm going to embarrass myself here, but MFA, children were telling me, is not many failed attempts, Mum. It's actually multi-factor authentication. And I don't know how many of you have failed those tests, but I often do, around ticking how many traffic lights are in the box. I get them wrong occasionally, but look, I think that's an opportunity for AI to help us as well. And really, we don't want our customers dropping out because they've failed 7 times to authenticate themselves. There needs to be a way in which that over-regulation doesn't stifle the innovation. So for me, in insurance generally, I think it's around embedding privacy settings in the design, not as an afterthought. They need to be in the products and platforms up front rather than sort of layered in late over the top is important. So the last one I'd say is perhaps a quick show of hands. So if your Gmail gets hacked, or that you have been compromised in that way, how many of you would contact your bank? Oh, not many. How many would contact your KiwiSaver provider or your insurer? Again, so very few. And that's something that to be mindful of. We have seen fraud examples where Gmails have been hacked, that someone works out that there is a life insurance policy, and we're seeing fraudulent claims coming through. We ring the Mr. and Mrs. Smith, and they are alive and well and thriving. So, actually just making sure that what we're telling the customer why we're doing this, but bringing them on that journey and educating them as well around that. So if you are in that position, reaching out, letting your providers know.
Just we'll pick up on that sort of piece around education as, I guess, the next thought, and because it feels like we sort of face a conundrum as an industry. And I just noted one of the questions that came through was referring to whether the bank should be slowing down international transfers, for example, to stop mules facilitating overseas payments. And it feels like there's a conundrum. On the one hand, we want to keep people safe, and protect them from those bad actors. On the other, how much payment friction and checks, and how many times do you want to go around the finding the power pole or the pedestrian crossing? How much of that do we want to put into the system to slow things down, to enable that without creating so much friction that from a consumer and a business, whether maybe a business or personal, you're just thinking this is just too hard, right? It's just too hard. So what are your thoughts on that in terms of, I guess, education and trying to get that balance right? And Kristy, you were touching on the education pieces, so I'll pick that up with you.
I would say that we always default to transparency and plain language. We build trust not just by preventing the fraud, but by helping our customers really understand how and why their personal data is protected in the role they play. So, I touched on that earlier, but the more informed our customers are, the stronger our collective sort of cyber posture in New Zealand is. It's, we're all working towards that common goal, but joint responsibility on the education. And I think we're seeing some amazing leaders in this space, and it's not just an IT team's problem. We all know in this room that this is a core strategic risk for all of us to solve.
Yeah. And Roger, your thoughts on?
Yeah, look, I think in banking, trust is imperative, and so having that trust from consumers is absolutely critical for getting ahead of the scam issue. I think that education flows from that trust and is inextricably linked to having trust. And so anything that anybody can do to communicate to customers around the practical steps that they need to take to keep themselves safe will only enhance and strengthen that trust. But just back to your payments point earlier, Phil. Yeah, I mean, I think that's a really classic dilemma in terms of, to go back to the 80s music theme, having a fraction too much friction in the payment system is actually a good thing, right? So, one of the things scammers do is use urgency and panic and speed to rush you into making a payment, so that you get caught up in the hype and excitement of that moment. And so having a real-time payment may be a nirvana or for the payments ecosystem, but actually having a little bit of friction in that, even if it's because it's often immediately after a customer has paid a scammer that they calm down and lose the hype and realize what's happened and realize they've been scammed. That might be in the hour or 90 minutes following making that payment that the penny drops. And so if we can have a little bit of friction in the system so that buffer can help keep people safe, I don't think that's a bad thing. I mean, if I'm paying you back for lunch yesterday and I make that payment at 10, if you receive the funds at 10:01 or 11:31, I don't think it's going to cause you to put out a profit warning on your P&L, right?
Well, it's interesting. There's a couple of questions coming up that are in this space of payments friction. We'll see if we get time at the end to loop back to it. But it's a great discussion. And Anthony, from your perspective, what are your thoughts on this?
I'm sort of on the same page, really. It's around that balance, isn't it? How do you get that? I think what's kind of cool is the sophistication that AI is going to bring around things like behavioural analysis. So I think you can do frictionless, but still actually far stronger than we have today. And you can see some of the banks rolling out some really neat technologies to try and identify scenarios where customers may have been compromised, or in fact, perhaps their account's been compromised, their password, and they can tell it's not them based on the way they enter their keystrokes. Or other factors, right? And I think by sort of embracing that type of technology, you can kind of have your cake and eat it in that space. I think around education, right? It sort of goes back to my earlier point around how do you keep people really mindful of this stuff so that they recognise that very important trigger. This is too good to be true. The rate's too high on the interest. Why are they needing me to do this so quickly? And just to get people to stop and then talk to somebody about it. Hey, I've got this. What do you think? And the person's going to go, hey, it's a scam. It's like when my parents ring up, I get really worried about my parents, honestly, about this stuff, because they're not digital natives, and they're not good at managing passwords. Their passwords are probably the same for everything, right? So that scares me, and I worry about that as well. And just how do you get them into that mindset?
Yeah.
I also worried about the impact. Like my kid's Roblox account got hacked, and man, it was like the worst thing that ever happened to the guy. And getting it back was pain in the, it was pretty tough. But again, for him, that interesting enough, that was a massive education moment for like a 9-year-old.
Yeah.
To have been hacked like that, and it was an invasion of his privacy. But he now remembers that, and I'm kind of glad he's had that experience.
Yeah.
Because he won't do that again, I don't think, for quite some time. Touch wood,
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's sort of interesting because there's another intersection. It's sort of another angle of financial literacy in some ways, isn't it? As we talk about the benefit of compounding, and we had the conversation yesterday around KiwiSaver in their context. But there's similar principles here in terms of literacy as it relates to this world as well. It seems to me. Just in terms of looking forward, understanding where we've been, the challenges, the landscape, and the threats. We've got a range of representation from our industry, senior executives and executives in all sorts of roles and functions in our audience. And I guess if there was a mindset shift or an operational change or something for you that would be top of mind that you believe that as a group we should be prioritising over the next 6, 12, 24 months as we face into this, what might that be? And Anthony, I'll let you answer that. We've got in the last few minutes we've got, and if we can capture the views of the others as well.
Look, I think around all of these spaces, it's finding another way through embracing things like AI. So it's take resilience. It's using AI to test scenarios effectively. It's using AI to red team to identify vulnerabilities more quickly, and using the threat intelligence to feed through how you test the resilience or the the protection mechanisms within your environment. It's actually taking what you do today as an organization and the human element of that, and really being strong around what's the use case of AI. And it's not we have to have an ultimate solution. It's just take the first step and then take the second one, and then it will become clearer. And that collaboration piece around how those ideas are shared, right? Like I think organizations don't share as much as they could because they're scared they're going to get found out in some way. They've got a vulnerability, but the reality is everyone has vulnerabilities, right? And just realize that. I know that because I'm around town a lot. Everyone has challenges, right? And just recognize that and move forward together.
Right. Kristy?
Yeah, look, for me, it's around removing that stigma. And so cyber threats are evolving faster than any of us can imagine. So changing that mindset from paroling our perimeters as such to how we're responding, continuous learning. I would urge you all, if you take one action today, go back to your organisation, do a real-time activity, get out your stopwatch, turn it on, and start practicing drafting those comms, responding to pieces, making decisions in an imperfect world. There'll be cyber hacks happen when your board chair is on a plane, your CEO and others. So really kind of developing that muscle and that resilience. So I like Antonia and others earlier on this morning, am an optimist. So I think if we do prioritise resilience, we lead with trust and we collaborate across our organisation sector and as a country. In the immortal words of Queen, we are the champions, my friend. We will keep fighting to the end.
We're doing really well on the 80s theme here. It's impressive, I have to say. Really impressive. Fantastic. Roger.
Lordy, where do I go after that? That was almost the big finish, wasn't it? But anyway, look, what I would say is actually I'd encourage everybody in this room within your own organisation to step up, but within your wider industry to step up. And, as I've said, this is something that we've all got to work on as financial services players collectively, and we can all do better for the greater good by working together. This isn't a brand competitive issue. This isn't a standalone, our brand is stronger than yours because we have better security systems. This is actually about the customer, and this is about our industry working together and actually stepping up for the greater good to protect our customers. And if we do that, and you can make a material difference quite quickly by putting in the mahi, If we can do that, the trust in our sector will grow and be stronger if we all work together on it.
Thank you, Roger. And I guess we've got about 10 or 15 seconds out, so we're basically out on time. But I'd like to say thank you to each of you for your candidness and thoughtfulness in the presentation, and hopefully from the audience perspective, there's been some insights that have been shared. And I think the messaging is this is an ongoing challenge, and we have to. I think we're going to be racing. I don't think we'll ever get ahead of it, but we've got to be as close to the front as we possibly can. There were a few questions there, Roger, at the end, but actually they were pretty much all for you. So we can loop around afterwards. But unfortunately, I'm on the red now. So thank you very much, and thanks everyone for listening in for us.
Thank you.